Hey there folks, today we're diving into the fascinating world of papermaking. It's a process most of us take for granted, but trust me, it's way more involved than just pushing a button on a printer. Our journey begins in the forests, where carefully selected trees are harvested. These aren't just any trees, mind you. We're talking about fast-growing species specifically planted for paper production. Once these trees are down, they're loaded onto massive trucks and transported to the paper mill. These trucks are no joke, built tough to handle the weight and the terrain. It's a well-coordinated dance getting these logs from the forest to the factory floor. And believe me, that's just the first step in along an intricate process. But hey, we've got a lot more ground to cover, from stripping bark to squeezing out water. So stick around because things are about to get really interesting. Welcome back to the paper mill. We've got our logs delivered and now it's time to get them ready for the next stage. First up, we got to get rid of that bark. Now you might think bark is just a nuisance, but it actually contains stuff that can mess up the paper making process. That's where the debarker comes in. This beast of a machine tumbles the logs around, using a combination of friction and water jets to strip away the bark. The bark doesn't go to waste though. It's often used as fuel to power the mill, making the whole process more efficient. With the bark gone, our logs are ready for the chipper. This machine is essentially a giant rotating blade that chops the logs into small, uniform chips. Think of it like making French fries, only instead of potatoes, we're using wood. These chips are much easier to break down in the next stage of the process, which, you guessed it, involves turning them into pulp. Stay tuned. All right, folks, we're getting to the heart of papermaking, turning those wood chips into pulp. Now, there are two main ways to do this: mechanical pulping and chemical pulping. Mechanical pulping, also known as groundwood pulping, is like using a giant cheese grater on the wood chips. It's a brute force method that separates the wood fibers by sheer force, producing a pulp that's great for things like newspapers and magazines. Chemical pulping, on the other hand, is a bit more refined. It uses chemicals to dissolve the lignin, which is the glue-like substance that holds wood fibers together. This process produces a stronger, brighter pulp that's ideal for higher-grade papers. Both methods have their pros and cons, and the choice depends on the type of paper being made. But regardless of the method, the end result is the same: a watery soup of wood fibers ready for the next stage of its transformation. We've got our pulp, but it's still a far cry from the pristine white sheets we're used to. That's where cleaning and bleaching come in. The pulp, at this stage, still contains bits of bark, dirt, and other impurities that need to be removed. It's like sifting flour before baking a cake. You want to get rid of any lumps or bumps. The pulp is passed through a series of screens and cleaners, removing anything that's not pure wood fiber. Once the pulp is squeaky clean, it's time for bleaching. Now, I know what you're thinking. Bleach isn't that bad for the environment. Well, the good news is that modern paper mills use environmentally friendly bleaching processes. These processes use oxygen, ozone, or hydrogen peroxide to brighten the pulp, minimizing the use of chlorine-based bleaches. The result is a bright white pulp that's ready to be transformed into paper. And that, my friends, is where the real magic happens. Section 5, sheet formation, a watery birth. We've got our clean, refined pulp, and now it's time to turn this watery soup into something resembling paper. This happens on a massive machine called a paper machine, and it's a sight to behold. Imagine a conveyor belt stretching the length of a football field, and you're starting to get the picture. The pulp, which is about 99% water at this point, is sprayed onto a moving wire mesh. As the water drains away, the wood fibers begin to bond together, forming a thin, delicate sheet. It's like magic seeing this watery mess transform into something solid right before your eyes. This process is carefully controlled, with adjustments made to the speed of the wire, the consistency of the pulp, and other factors to create the desired paper weight and texture. It's a delicate dance between water, fiber, and technology, and it's the heart of the paper-making process. Section 6. Pressing matters, squeezing out the excess. Our paper sheet is starting to take shape, but it's still way too wet to be of any use. Think of it like a soggy sponge. It needs to be squeezed out before it can absorb anything. That's where the pressing section of the paper machine comes in. The still, fragile sheet is passed through a series of rollers that press out even more water. These rollers are massive, some weighing several tons, and they apply just the right amount of pressure to remove the water without damaging the paper. It's like giving the paper a giant hug, squeezing out all the excess moisture. As the paper passes through the presses, it becomes stronger and smoother, starting to resemble the paper we know and love, but it's still not quite there yet. It needs to go through one more crucial step: drying. Section 7, drying time from soggy pulp to paper sheets. Our paper sheet has come a long way, but it's still a bit damp from its watery birth. To transform it into the crisp, dry paper we're all familiar with, it needs to go through the drying section of the paper machine. This is where things get hot, literally. The paper sheet, still delicate but gaining strength, is threaded through a labyrinth of heated rollers. These rollers, heated by steam or natural gas, gently bake the remaining moisture out of the paper like a giant clothes dryer for paper. As the paper glides over the hot rollers, you can literally see the moisture evaporating, rising into the air like a wispy fog. It's a mesmerizing process, watching the paper transform from damp and floppy to dry and crisp right before your eyes. The temperature and speed of the drying process are carefully controlled to ensure the paper dries evenly and doesn't become brittle. It's a delicate balance, but it's the key to producing high-quality paper. Section 8. The final touches: cutting, rolling, and packaging. Well, folks, our journey through the paper mill is almost complete. We've seen logs transformed into pulp, pulp spread into sheets, and sheets pressed and dried. Now it's time for the final touches: cutting, rolling, and packaging. The continuous roll of paper that emerges from the drying section is truly a sight to behold. It can be hundreds of feet long and weigh several tons. This giant roll is then fed through a series of sharp blades that slice it into smaller rolls or sheets depending on its intended use. Think of it like a giant deli slicer, only instead of salami, we're slicing paper. These smaller rolls or sheets are then carefully packaged and labeled, ready to be shipped to printers, notebook manufacturers, and countless other businesses that rely on paper. And that, my friends, is how paper is made. It's a complex and fascinating process, a testament to human ingenuity and our ability to transform natural resources into everyday essentials.